Hello, thank you for joining us to learn more about the Smith Innovation Hub Infrastructure Master Plan. I'm Jill Bushbacher with the City of Tempe Economic Development Department. We appreciate all the input the community has provided to date. Many of you have been working with us over the last few years in our Smith Innovation Hub pilot area to give us your input and feedback and help us determine what kinds of enhancements are needed in the area to best serve you all. This particular plan is to help the city as well as the private sector identify priority projects as it relates to infrastructure to enhance the area and as it continues to develop to help it reach its highest potential. We've hired our colleagues with HDR to manage the study, and now I'd like to turn it over to Michael LaBianca with HDR Engineering to provide the presentation to you all today.
Thank you, Jill. And again, my name is Michael LaBianca. I'm a transportation planner with HDR Engineering, and I'm leading a multidisciplinary team that is developing the Smith Innovation Hub Infrastructure Master Plan. And for ease of presentation, I'm going to refer to the Smith Innovation Hub as the Smith throughout this presentation. This first exhibit shows the area that we're talking about, the Smith, bordered to the north by the Rio Salado Parkway, on the east by the Price Road Frontage Road and State Route Loop 101, on the south by University Drive, and on the west by McClintock Drive. It's approximately 1/2 square mile. And as Jill mentioned, the purpose of this plan is to guide public and private infrastructure improvements, identify and prioritize infrastructure needs for short and long-term timeframes, and provide planning level costs and prepare an implementation plan for the Smith. This is not a visioning document. This is a guide for infrastructure improvements consistent with the Tempe development guidelines that were adopted in 2020 following the adoption of the general plan amendment for the area north of 5th Street, which I'll show in just a moment. During the process of adopting a general plan amendment and the development guidelines, the city engaged in numerous meetings with stakeholders. That information is available on the project webpage, and I'll be referring to some of the input that we've received through that process, which helped guide the development of the infrastructure master plan. Returning to the Smith and the general plan amendment, you can see the area here on the left that's hatched is the area that changed with the general plan amendment in 2020, allowing industrial mixed use in that area of the Smith north of 5th Street, and changing the commercial uses that previously existed in the general plan land use along Rio Salado Parkway from commercial to mixed use. An example of mixed use development that is moving forward along Rio Salado Parkway is the Tempe Station. The concept of mixed use, vertical mixed use, is shown in this exhibit on the right side of the slide, which shows residential above light industrial or office uses. Mixed use can also occur on a particular parcel horizontally, with a mix of uses occurring on the same parcel. The exhibit at the bottom right of this slide shows the bike map for the city of Tempe, taken from the Tempe Transportation Plan, and it shows the bike route extending through the Smith on Smith's Road. As Jill mentioned, Smith is really a unique business environment with over 250 employers and over 5,000 employees. At the beginning of this project, we surveyed businesses in the Smith, and one of the interesting things we learned is that many of the businesses have been in existence for over 30 years, one even as long as 40 years. So there's a long history of business and activity in the Smith. However, today's industrial uses typically require higher ceilings, wider and taller bays, and wider turning radiuses on sites and larger lots. Therefore, we are starting to see a lot of adaptive reuse, two of which are noted here, Circa Tempe and Circa 78. The design features of these older industrial manufacturing businesses in the Smith are more consistent with newer uses, which include mixed commercial, office, and retail, as we're observing. The surrounding community also impacts the infrastructure needs for the Smith. North of Rio Salado Parkway is the Tempe Marketplace, and just east of the Tempe Marketplace is a developing Rio 2100 mixed-use development. West of Tempe Marketplace is the Novus mixed-use development. These uses are increasing the activity north of the Smith. West of the Smith are the APS facilities, and east of the Smith is Loop 101, precluding east-west travel through the Smith and channeling a lot of the circulation needs today north-south through the Smith, from the Tempe neighborhoods to the south. These neighborhoods to the south, referred to the Escalante and Alegre Parks communities, have higher shares of demographic categories known to contribute to transit dependency when compared to the city. And that's reflected in the census information shown on this slide, which indicates transit and bike to work at 1.5 times the city's rate. However, walking to work is less than the city's rate. This transportation overview slide shows some of the information that was used to help develop the infrastructure master plan. And while we're going to be focusing on streetscape improvements, we also addressed other infrastructure needs of the Smith. As the streetscape is the most apparent and obvious and impactful to businesses within the Smith, we're going to focus on those recommendations today. A couple of things that I'd like to point out regarding the transportation within the Smith. Street segments are quite wide today. If you're familiar with Smith Road, you know that there's 48 feet from curb to curb, and that accommodates one travel lane in each direction and a center turn lane. Street widths on Rockford Drive and River Drive are also 48 feet within an 80-foot right-of-way. The remainder of the streets in the Smith typically have 60-foot right-of-way, unless indicated otherwise here, such as north on Smith Road and also on Industrial Drive in the west. One thing I'd like to point out regarding right-of-way widths is that there is a section of constrained right-of-way on Perry Lane north of 3rd Street, where there's only 30 feet of existing right-of-way. Also, the street through this area is unimproved, and as you can see with the hatching here, there is occasional ponding as a result of storms that impact ponding in the roadway along Perry Lane. A couple of other features that I'd like to point out on this map is the areas of authorized parking. No on-street parking is allowed in the areas that are indicated in orange. In addition, there are significant sidewalk gaps in the Smith. You can see the green lines next to each of the roadways indicates where sidewalks exist today. And while sidewalks exist continuously along Smith Road from University Drive to Rio Salado Parkway and along the southern portion of Perry, elsewhere throughout the Smith, there are significant gaps in the sidewalk network. The next slides are going to present our recommendations for short term, which is approximately the next 5 years. And this will provide planning level information to begin budgeting and implementing improvements. These improvements are focused on current and future users, with a focus on current needs of the Smith. The process for implementation of the plan will use the plan as a guide, and projects will be phased in over time as funding becomes available. Private development may provide opportunities to implement infrastructure or fund improvements. To develop our recommendations, we focused on some priorities. First and foremost, safety. We also looked at pedestrian and bicycle comfort and accessibility and business access. Using those priorities, we developed streetscape criteria, which allowed us to compare the alternatives that are presented. We focused on level of comfort, which focuses on bicycle and pedestrian users, curb access, which included parking, pickups and drop-offs, and transit, which focuses on all users, and access and mobility for businesses. Short-term streetscape recommendations focus on an H-shaped area, which includes Smith Road from University Drive to Rio Salado Parkway, 5th Street connecting Smith Road to Perry Lane, and then Perry Lane from Rio Salado Parkway south to University Drive. I'm going to talk about each one of these areas individually. On Perry Lane, the goals of the recommendations were to make sidewalk improvements that would address Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. Also, to complete the full street section north of 5th Street, where I pointed out that there is a constrained area of right-of-way. And finally, to mitigate the stormwater runoff and on-street ponding which occurs today. Two alternatives were presented for Perry Lane north of 5th Street. Alternative A, on-street parking, attached sidewalks, and lighting, and alternative B, which included detached sidewalks, areas of landscape, bulb outs, and some on-street parking. Alternative B also incorporated low-impact development, which is a method of using increased landscape area to mitigate the impacts of stormwater runoff. When this information was presented following public meeting number 1, we found that an overwhelming majority of respondents preferred alternative B, incorporating the low-impact development. Respondents liked the shade and parking aspects of this presented, although there were concerns with cost and maintenance of landscape in the right-of-way. In addition, one commenter suggested that attached sidewalks would allow businesses to develop right up to the street, providing shade and more of an urban feel. However, what we're seeing in the Smith is not a reconstruction of buildings, but largely an adaptive reuse of existing structures, which are set back from the street because of existing zoning requirements requiring setbacks. Our recommendation moving forward is alternative B, which would acquire additional right-of-way to complete Perry Lane north of 5th Street, consistent with the right-of-way south of 5th Street, which is 60 feet overall, incorporating detached sidewalks, on-street parking, and landscape bulb outs to accommodate additional street trees and the low-impact development I mentioned earlier. The low-impact development, and the picture here is an example from College Avenue in Tempe, is an approach to stormwater management that uses the landscape to absorb stormwater runoff, and it would augment traditional stormwater conveyance means to address the ponding that's occurring today after storms. These additional areas of landscape enhances the street, calms traffic, and adds shade. South of 5th Street, we're recommending the existing curb-to-curb street section remain as it is today, with attached sidewalks and on-street parking continuously. This would also introduce lighting. 5th Street, between Smith and Perry Lane, the goals were to make sidewalk improvements, again to address ADA deficiencies, and maintain the on-street parking. We conducted a business survey prior to the start of the project. What we found is that 38% of respondents felt that on-street parking was either important or very important to their business. 5th Street between Perry and Smith, we presented two alternatives. Alternative A included on-street parking with areas of curb bulb out to accommodate street trees and low-impact development. Alternative B included attached sidewalks with on-street parking. Responses to the alternatives were mixed, with 56% of respondents preferring alternative A with continuous curbside parking. However, commenters noted that they liked the additional landscaping offered with alternative B. What's recommended for 5th Street between Perry and Smith is a hybrid, alternative C, which would include detached sidewalk and on-street parking. Just an example of what alternative C could look like. On-street parking, detached sidewalks, allowing for a landscape strip, street trees, and lighting. For Smith Road, our goals were to make sidewalk improvements, again, to address ADA deficiencies, to add striping for protected bike lanes, to implement the Bike It route, and to improve bus stops with shelters and benches. Again, two alternatives were proposed. Alternative A, which maintained the two-way left turn lane and then eliminated on-street parking and replaced it with buffered bike lanes and maintained the existing attached sidewalks, as well as incorporating lighting. Alternative B eliminates the two-way left turn lane, maintains parking on one side of the street, and offers protected bike lanes on both sides of the street, in addition to the attached sidewalks and lighting. Alternative A with the two-way left turn lane received a majority approval, 65%. And while an evaluation of traffic found that the street, Smith Road, would operate without the two-way left turn lane, it does introduce challenges for some of the business activity with large trucks. Therefore, it's recommended that the two-way left turn lane be maintained to allow that access and also to mitigate future traffic as the area develops and traffic increases. We did hear from respondents about concerns regarding the elimination of the two-way left turn lane, and also about concerns with bicycle safety and delivery trucks. We considered other options for the Bike It route through the Smith and found that the Smith Road was the best option, and therefore recommending Alternative A, which maintains a two-way left turn lane, introduces bike lanes, maintains the existing sidewalks at back of curb, and adds lighting along Smith Road. The slide summarizes the recommendations that we just walked through. Lighting was prioritized in the short term along the Smith Road bicycle route, Perry and Fifth pedestrian priority routes, and the recommended truck route proposed, which I'm going to discuss in just a moment. Going back to the business survey that was conducted prior to the beginning of the project, when asked what would you like to see more of in the Smith Innovation Hub area, number one response was lighting. In short term, we're recommending lighting along the routes mentioned. This slide shows the existing lights as orange dots, and then the proposed lights as yellow dots, which would bring these streets up to City of Tempe standards. Water and wastewater considerations were also looked at, because when the master plan for the City of Tempe water and wastewater systems was developed in 2015, it was based on the general plan land uses in that plan. With the general plan amendment mentioned at the beginning of this study, we wanted to evaluate whether those changes in land use would impact the water and wastewater needs of the area. And what we found is that there are no significant capacity issues as a result of the planned land uses. Although we did identify that with future development, several or numerous lines of water lines rather would have to be improved from 6 to 8 inch or from 8 to 12 inch. One section of 8 to 12 inch line exists along Perry Lane where we're recommending improvements. So there may be an opportunity to address that section of pipe at the time of the Perry Lane improvements. The proposed truck routing was introduced at the last public meeting. And this is not, we're not proposing that trucks would be precluded from the routes that are not shown here. Rather, the recommendation is that the City of Tempe would work with the business community and suggest that these routes be implemented in a voluntary manner, such as, or rather to reduce the amount of truck traffic on Smith Road. The intent being here that trucks, wherever they originate or are destined for, would proceed from that location to the nearest proposed truck route to exit the Smith. For instance, business just south of 5th Street on Smith Road looking to exit the Smith to the northwest would proceed to 5th Street and then follow 5th Street to Perry Lane and then exit either at Rio Salado Parkway or by 3rd Street to McClintock Drive. This would eliminate some of the truck traffic along Smith Road, but we understand that trucks are an integral part of the operation of the Smith. Additional short-term projects that are recommended include some of the transportation plan projects from the Tempe Transportation Plan. And those are bike lane improvements at the Rio Salado Parkway and University Drive intersections with McClintock Drive, where bike lane drops, as shown in this picture, prior to the intersection. In both instances, that could be corrected through additional improvements to the roadway, including striping. Sidewalk improvements along east side of McClintock Drive, south of 3rd Street, would also address a gap in the sidewalk on the east side of McClintock Drive. Although continuously along the west side of McClintock Drive, there is a large sidewalk existing. Additionally, we recommend incorporating bus shelters along Tempe Bus Route 62, which follows Smith Road through the Smith. This is an example of new transit shelters prototypes that were developed through Designing Tempe's New Transit Shelters project that was conducted in 2020. What's shown here is a small shelter. City of Tempe Transportation would work with transit agency to identify the proper shelters for Smith Road. It could be small shelters or even micro shelters, depending on the transit activity in the area. There's also an opportunity with bus shelters to introduce art with an art shelter, which would help to enhance the Smith identity. The long-term focus looks out at a planning horizon of 2040, and the actions that are presented following slides could be implemented through capital investment projects as opportunities arise or as part of redevelopment. These include Perry Lane south of 5th Street. And this recommendation would match the section that we're recommending north of 5th Street with detached sidewalks, areas of curb bulb out for increased landscaping, and some parking. On 3rd Street, between McClintock to Smith Road, similar situation with detached parking, detached sidewalks, on-street parking, with occasional areas of bulb outs to accommodate increased landscape, as well as lighting. For 5th Street, from Smith to Price, this is a continuation of the recommendation between Smith and Perry, which calls for on-street parking with detached sidewalks, lighting, and a landscape strip to allow for street trees. Rockford and River Drive would have a similar approach to 3rd Street. Detached sidewalks, on-street parking, and occasional areas of bulb outs to accommodate additional street trees for shade. This is a conceptual rendering of what the ultimate pedestrian network would look like. The areas of green striping on either side of the street indicate those gaps that exist today in the sidewalk. Ultimately, is it envisioned that sidewalks would be incorporated on all of the streets through the Smith. In addition, the dotted green lines indicate active transportation, pedestrian and bicycle connections that could be made through redevelopment areas when they occur. The City of Tempe would work with developers to look at making these connections to create more of an urban grid as this area develops with mixed use and more of an urban feel. Long-term lighting throughout the Smith would be brought up to city standards. And that long-term lighting proposal is shown with the orange dots on this slide. One of the questions that we asked respondents after the first public meeting were some of the ways that we could help build the Smith identity. The number one answer was gateway entrances. 2 was public art. 3 was branding. And 4 was design standards. It's my understanding that the City of Tempe is moving forward with developing design standards for the Smith today. Gateway entrances are shown on this slide are interpreted from the Innovate Tempe presentation, Tempe City Council in 2020, and shows those gateway entrances on the Smith Road, as well as Rockford Drive and River Drive at University. We encourage you to get involved by commenting, and you can do that by visiting tempe.gov/Smith Hub and comment using the comment form. Please comment by August 16th so that we can incorporate your thoughts and ideas into the final plan. Our next steps are to prepare the Smith Infrastructure Master Plan with a finalized list of prioritized projects, cost estimates for supporting both long and short-term planning for the area, and then present that plan to the City Council sometime in the fall 2021. If you have questions following this presentation, please reach out to the folks that are indicated on this slide, Jill Bushbacker or Project Manager Ken Halloran. And please visit tempe.gov/Smith Hub to provide comments. Thank you.